Marcus Elian was 38 years old when his wife handed him a manila envelope across a candlelit table on the evening of their 10th wedding anniversary. He had made the reservation 3 weeks in advance. He had picked up her favorite gardenias from the same florist who had arranged their wedding tables a decade earlier. He wore the dark charcoal suit she had once called her favorite, and the watch his grandmother had pressed into his palm the morning he graduated from Georgia Tech, telling him to always keep time properly. To the couples at the surrounding tables in that Charlotte restaurant, they looked like a husband and wife celebrating something meaningful. They were. Simone Elian sat across from him in a navy dress he had not seen before, her hair arranged upward the way she reserved for other people, and she slid the envelope across the white linen tablecloth with a kind of calm that is only possible after months of private rehearsal. "I think we both know this is over," she said. She had been preparing this moment for 17 months. The attorney in Buckhead. The apartment she had already signed the lease on, 2 miles from his office. The savings account she had been quietly filling from his paychecks, 43 transfers over 22 months. Never more than $800 at a time, always on Thursdays. She had structured her exit with a precision she had never once applied to their marriage. She had no idea what Marcus Elian actually owned. She had no idea that the man she was divorcing across a white linen tablecloth held a silent founding stake in 3 infrastructure development companies and a commercial real estate portfolio scheduled to close the following spring at $512 million. What happened next did not happen that night. It took 23 months. But when it came on a billboard 60 feet above the interchange at I-85 and Brookshire Freeway. His name, his face, his project. And she saw it from the passenger seat of the man she had replaced him with. Before we jump into the story, comment where in the world you are watching from and subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you need to hear. The morning of October 14th had started the way most of Marcus's good mornings did. Quietly, with intention, before anything else in the neighborhood had come alive. He was in the garage by 6, running a hand sander along the edge of a built-in bookshelf he had been constructing from salvaged white oak. The boards had come from a demolished school in Decatur, carried home in the bed of his work truck over 3 separate trips, because the wood was exceptional and throwing away exceptional material was something his grandmother had never permitted. The garage smelled of sawdust and mineral oil and the faint cool of October slipping under the side door. The bookshelf had nothing to do with work. It had nothing to do with the companies, the contracts, the infrastructure projects worth far more than anyone in that neighborhood knew about. It was just wood and a man with a plan for the morning. His grandmother had told him, "A man who knows how to make something with his hands never has to beg for anything with his mouth." He had been 11 years old, watching her hang curtain rods without a level, working entirely by feel, and the curtains had hung perfectly straight. He had never forgotten it. He carried that principle into his undergraduate years at Georgia Tech, into his first position as a site engineer at a regional infrastructure firm in Charlotte, and into the careful years that followed. Years Simone believed were about overtime and modest bonuses. Years that were, in fact, about something else entirely. His other laptop, the one with the matte black casing that stayed in the locked lower drawer of his garage workbench, held the files. The trusts, the equity structures, the holding companies, Patricia Osei's quarterly reports on portfolio performance. None of it had ever been mentioned inside this house. Simone came downstairs at 7:15 with her phone already open in her hand, scrolling without looking up. "Anniversary dinner tonight," she said. 7 o'clock. "You're still good?" "Still good," Marcus said. She kissed his cheek, dry, precise, aimed just below the jaw, and poured a cup of coffee she did not finish. She moved back toward the stairs with the phone in her hand, and it was only after he heard her heel on the landing that he registered the perfume. She had not been wearing that perfume yesterday. He said nothing about it. He returned to the sander. He had met Simone through a mutual friend at a literacy fundraiser in 2013. She had been working as an event coordinator then, organized, quick, and able to hold a room's attention without appearing to try. She had asked him what he did for a living, and when he said civil engineering, she had tilted her head and said, "Tell me one thing about bridges that the average person never thinks about." He had talked for 20 minutes about thermal expansion and the way long spans had to account for the season they were constructed in. And she had listened the way very few people ever listened, with her entire attention visible in her eyes. He had thought, watching her, that this was the woman he wanted to build a life beside. That woman was who he had married. He was no longer certain where she had gone. On the workbench beside the oak boards sat his phone. Not the personal one, the other one. The one with the matte case that had lived in his inner jacket pocket for 4 years and that Simone had never once asked about. On it was a text from Patricia, sent 2 weeks prior. It said only, "We need to talk." Not about the Merriweather close, something personal. He had called her back the morning he received it, speaking quietly from the garage, and she had started 3 words before he interrupted her. "Come in Monday," he had said. Nothing in writing. Understood, Patricia had replied. He finished the morning's sanding, washed his hands at the utility sink, and went inside to put on the suit. He came home from the anniversary dinner and sat in the garage with the lights off. The papers were on the kitchen counter, where he had set them after reading them in the car, and the house was quiet, because Simone had retrieved a bag she'd apparently packed in advance and walked out 20 minutes after they returned from the restaurant. She had said her lawyer would be in touch. Then, she had closed the front door behind her with the same measured finality she had used sliding the envelope across the table. He had not raised his voice. He had not asked her a single question. He went inside, poured 2 fingers of bourbon he had no interest in drinking, and sat down at the kitchen table with the divorce filings spread in front of him. Her attorneys, a Buckhead firm that specialized in high-asset marriage dissolution, had filed for equitable distribution of all marital assets. Their valuation was built from what Marcus permitted to be visible: his declared salary, his listed bonuses, and the joint accounts. They had constructed a portrait of a man with a comfortable but modest life, and they intended to divide it down the middle. They did not know about the firms. They did not know about the trusts. They did not know about the portfolio, structured through 3 separate holding companies, all of them predating this marriage by design, none of them appearing on any document bearing Simone Alliance's name. But that was not what kept him at the table until 3 a.m. It was a line in her voluntary financial disclosure. She had listed a savings account he had never known existed, opened in 2021, with deposits beginning 3 months earlier, pulled from the household account, categorized on his monthly statements as recurring household expenses. He pulled 22 months of joint account records. His hands did not shake. His face remained perfectly calm. He moved through the statements the way he moved through project audits, methodically, without sentiment, because sentiment was a resource with no useful return. 43 transfers. Never more than $800. Never less than $200. Always on Thursdays. He did the arithmetic. $68,400. He photographed every page with his personal phone. He forwarded the images to a secure cloud folder. He built a timeline on the legal pad, dates and amounts, and the household expense categories they had been disguised under. Then, he kept going. He went back further than the joint account. He pulled their shared utility records, the grocery card, the streaming subscriptions, every recurring charge on every account that had ever passed through this household. He was not looking for more of the same. He was looking for the pattern beneath the pattern, the thing that explained why the transfers started when they did, and why Thursday, specifically, had been the chosen day. The grocery card told him something interesting. For 22 months, the Thursday grocery charges had run approximately 20 to 30% lower than the Monday and Wednesday charges. Smaller baskets, fewer items. The kind of shopping you did on your way to somewhere else, rather than the weekly provisioning of a household. She had been efficient on Thursdays. She had been somewhere else on Thursdays. He wrote the word Thursday on the legal pad and put a circle around it. He pulled the credit card she maintained as a personal expense account, one he had never monitored, because she had always been, in every visible way, careful with money. What he found was not a woman preparing to leave a marriage. What he found was a woman sustaining a separate life inside one. Restaurant charges in Midtown on evenings she had described as work events. A hotel stay in Savannah on the weekend he had been in Jacksonville for a site inspection. A recurring charge from a florist, roses, not her preferred flower, appearing on the last Friday of every month for 11 consecutive months. And a charge from October 2022, $812, from a men's clothing boutique he had never visited. He created a new folder on his secure laptop. He named it Foundation. Then, he called Patricia Osai. "I'm ready for Monday," he said when she answered. "Full team. Pull the complete pre-marital holding structure and anything we have on asset protection filings from 2011 forward." A single pause. 7 o'clock. 7 is fine, Marcus said. He set the phone down and looked across the garage at the half-finished bookshelf waiting in the corner. The white oak boards patient in the way that good material always was, unbothered by the delay, certain of what it would eventually become. Tools were meant to work, not shine. His grandmother had said that too. He was done shining for anyone. Patricia Osei's conference room occupied the 31st floor of a downtown Charlotte building, whose structural retrofit Marcus's second company had consulted on in 2018. He had never mentioned this to Simone. He had never mentioned a great many things. Patricia sat across from him in a charcoal blazer with a legal pad already covered in her sharp, deliberate handwriting. She had managed Marcus's private legal affairs for 6 years. She did not flinch at things. "Tell me what you found," she said. He laid it out in sequence: the transfers, the hotel, the florist, the clothing boutique charge, the timeline he had assembled on the yellow legal pad. When he finished, Patricia set down her pen. "She retained Henderson and Like," she said. "I know. They're thorough. They're thorough at finding what people reveal to them," Marcus said. "They built their case on what I allowed to be visible." Patricia allowed herself one small, measured expression that functioned as a smile. "Then let's discuss what they haven't seen." The meeting ran 3 hours. What emerged was a comprehensive accounting of Marcus C. Lyon's actual financial position, a position built, deliberately and legally, over 14 years of careful structuring that preceded his marriage by 2 years. The 3 holding companies. The equity stakes. The Merriweather Development portfolio, 2 months from a closing worth $512 million, 3% of which was held in Marcus's name through a trust established in 2011. His name appeared in none of the public-facing project materials. His face appeared nowhere associated with any of it. That was about to change. But not in the way Simone expected. "They'll pursue discovery," Patricia said. "Let them," Marcus replied. What they'll find are 3 holding companies predating the marriage, properly documented, no commingling with marital assets at any point. The household account is the household account. The firms are the firms. The lines are clear because I drew them clearly 14 years ago. You're clean. I'm clean. An engineer who had spent a decade in infrastructure understood that the most critical phase of any project was never the crisis. It was always the planning that happened long before the first instrument touched the ground. 3 days later, Marcus drove to his Aunt Dora's house in Concord. She was 71, a retired school teacher who made the best chess pie in Cabarrus County and had known Marcus since he was 4 days old. She opened the door before he reached the porch steps. "You lost weight," she said. "I'm fine," he told her. "I can see you're fine," Aunt Dora said. "I asked about the weight." They sat at her kitchen table, and he told her most of it, the shape of it, not the numbers. The dinner, the envelope, the hotel receipt, the florist. Aunt Dora listened without interrupting, which was not her usual habit. When he finished, she turned her coffee mug slowly on the oilcloth. "That girl," she said, "was never hungry for what you were actually offering. She was hungry for what she thought she could extract." "I know that now," Marcus said. "Do you know it all the way down?" He thought about the transfers, the clothing boutique, the hotel in Savannah. "Yes," he said. "I know it all the way down." Aunt Dora looked at him with the steady, unroaded gaze of a woman who had survived things that would have permanently rearranged most people. "Your grandmother would tell you exactly what I'm about to tell you. You don't owe anyone the version of yourself they chose to throw away." He drove home with that sitting in him like the grain of a well-seasoned board, solid, a foundation to build from. What Marcus's team had assembled in the meantime about a man named Garrett Holloway was, by any professional standard, quietly devastating. Holloway was a junior partner at a mid-tier firm in Buckhead who had accumulated significant personal debt from a failed commercial real estate venture in 2020, and who had, according to records subpoenaed through the discovery process, provided legal guidance to a client whose interests directly conflicted with an existing client at his own firm. The state bar complaint did not require Marcus to file it personally. It required only that someone with standing in documentation submit what the evidence already contained. That was the nature of a properly constructed case. It moved under its own weight once it was complete. Patricia's paralegal had also identified something more immediate and more personal. Holloway's personal credit profile showed a $12,000 cash advance taken in September 2022, 1 month before the clothing boutique charge appeared on Simone's account. The money had come from a line of credit. The clothing had apparently come from that line of credit, routed through Simone's card to maintain the appearance that the expense belonged to her household. The man financing his wardrobe with borrowed money had been presented, presumably, as a man of standing. Marcus had encountered this species before in professional settings. They were always recognizable by their shoes and their debt-to-income ratio. He noted it. He moved on. Bitterness required ongoing emotional investment in people who no longer deserved it. That Sunday evening, Marcus went home and ate the meal Simone had prepared. Chicken and rice from his mother's recipe, the one she had learned during better years and continued using long after she had stopped using most things associated with his family. He told her the food was good. He asked about her week. He listened with a face that cost him nothing, because it was the expression of a man who had already completed the work that needed to be done. She sat across from him and smiled the assured smile of a woman who believed she was the only person at the table who understood how the story was going to end. Real power operated in quiet rooms, and he had been in those rooms for a very long time. The mediation was scheduled for a Tuesday morning in early February, at a neutral conference facility in South End. Marcus arrived first. He was always first. He sat at the far end of the table. To his left was Patricia. To her left was Howard Bates, a forensic accountant who had worked with Marcus's companies for 8 years and who had produced, over the previous 6 weeks, a document nearly an inch thick cataloging the complete financial architecture of Marcus Alliance private holdings, each instrument dated, each trust annotated, each boundary between marital and premarital assets drawn in language that did not invite interpretation. When Simone arrived with her lead attorney, Davenport, she was composed. She wore the same kind of measured confidence she had carried into the anniversary dinner, the assured presentation of a woman entering a room she believed she already controlled. She saw the document stack in front of Howard Bates. She looked at Marcus. He said nothing. He nodded once, the way he acknowledged colleagues at a project kickoff. Davenport presented his asset summary: joint account value, home equity, declared income history over the marriage, a projected equitable distribution figure. It was professionally assembled. It was also constructed from an incomplete understanding of the man sitting at the far end of the table. Patricia waited until Davenport finished. Then Howard Bates opened the binder. He spoke for 42 minutes. He covered each holding company in sequence: their founding dates, their equity structures, the legal documentation of their separation from all marital assets, and the Merriweather Development portfolio, which had closed 11 days prior at $512 million. Marcus Alliance held a 3% founding stake through a trust established in 2011. 2 years before he ever met Simone. Its current liquidation value was $15,360,000. Under North Carolina law, none of it was subject to equitable distribution. The room was very still. Davenport asked to confer privately with his client. They were gone for 14 minutes. When they returned, Simone's composure was still present, but had become the kind that costs something to maintain, the kind that has to be held in place rather than worn naturally. Davenport made a revised proposal. Then a second revised proposal. Marcus let Patricia respond to both, calmly and precisely. Simone looked at him directly. "I didn't know," she said quietly. It had the quality of someone uncertain whether they were explaining or apologizing or asking for something. "I know you didn't," Marcus said. It was the most honest thing either of them had offered the other in a long time. He gathered his copies of Howard's document, slid them back into his folder, and stood. "You spent 17 months planning against a man you never actually investigated," he said quietly. "I spent 14 years planning differently." He buttoned his jacket and walked out. Behind him, Davenport was already gathering his papers in the manner of an attorney recalibrating his position. Patricia remained seated, completing her notes in the unhurried way of someone whose work was finished and who understood that there was no reason to rush the documentation of a clean outcome. The hallway was long and his footsteps were steady on the polished floor, and he was thinking, for no reason he could easily articulate, about the white oak boards salvaged from a Decatur school, and about how the best material always came from something that had already stood for a very long time before anyone thought to use it. 23 months passed the way a river moves in winter, steady, indifferent, going where it was always going. Marcus finished the bookshelf. He installed it in what had been the guest room and was now his study, fitted with the books he had kept and the photographs he had chosen, anchored by a worn leather chair his grandmother had owned that had lived in storage since her death. The room smelled of old paper and coffee and oak. And it was precisely the room he had wanted for 12 years without saying so to anyone. He had built it board by board, shelf by shelf, when he was ready. And not before. The Merriweather Development Project opened in late spring. It included a community plaza, a mixed-use corridor spanning 4 city blocks, and a public art installation commissioned by the city as part of the ribbon-cutting celebration. The development group purchased advertising space on a billboard at the I-85 and Brookshire interchange for the 6-week opening campaign. The board was 60 feet wide. It featured 3 of the project's principal partners photographed at the groundbreaking. Marcus was on the left. His name appeared below his image in letters 2 feet tall. He did not attend the ribbon cutting. He was in Nashville that weekend for a site walkthrough on a new project. A colleague sent him a photograph of the billboard from the highway. Marcus looked at it once, replied with a brief thank you, and returned his phone to his jacket pocket. A woman named Celeste had arrived in his life the previous spring in the way real things sometimes do, quietly, through a mutual colleague, over coffee that extended to 3 hours. Through a conversation about structural restoration and what people chose to rebuild after they stopped building for the wrong reasons. She was a preservation architect who asked questions with no simple answers and seemed to actively prefer it that way. She moved through the world with a calm practicality that looked like simplicity from the outside, and was, in fact, the product of someone who had thought carefully about what she actually wanted. He liked her. She liked him. Neither of them was in a hurry. News of Simone reached him the following August through a brief text from a cousin who meant well and always reported. Simone had vacated the Buckhead apartment. Garrett Holloway had resigned from his firm following a state bar disciplinary proceeding. Simone was coordinating events for a mid-tier hospitality company in Alpharetta. The social network she had cultivated during the marriage, relationships built around his quiet stability and her visible energy, had dispersed in the way networks do when the foundation they depend on is removed. Her mother had not spoken to her since the mediation. Marcus read the text. He set the phone down on the kitchen counter he had recently resurfaced with white oak tile. The last of the Decatur boards, cut thin and sealed, and poured a cup of coffee. He heard Celeste's car in the driveway. He was free. He was solvent. He was unbothered. Some things, he thought, walking toward the door with 2 mugs, were worth the patience to build only once, and only worth building right. I hope you enjoyed that one. Be sure to like the video and subscribe so you don't miss the next story. I've picked out 2 more for you that I think you'll really like.